Good day to everyone, and welcome to the Ignatian Year Recollections. I'd like to introduce myself first. I'm Father Albert Tan. I'm from Malaysia. Currently, I'm working in the novitiate as associate assistant to the novice master in the formations of the novices, and also a retreat director for the Sacred Heart Retreat House in the Philippines. Over the years, there are many times I was asked to share about my vocations and also to share about my conversions. And each time in those occasions when I asked to share, I cannot separate my experience of conversions or being called to God to religious life apart from my own family background and experience. To begin today's sharing, I would say my conversions started from my family growing up with 8 siblings, 4 boys, 4 girls, and I was in the 4th of the family. My father worked very hard to provide for us, but our family was so big. In order to provide for us, we had cut down on a lot of other luxurious expenditure. For example, we could not have ice cream, sometimes maybe only once a year. And most of the time we celebrate our birthday with normal lunch or dinner without birthday cake. So I would consider our family below middle class, as it were. Everything changed, I would say, my conversion starts, everything changed when my father passed away. I was 9, and the eldest in our family was only 12 years old. And the youngest in our family was my little sister. She was born only 1 month prior to the death of my father. When he died, being the sole breadwinner for the family, our family went through quite a lot of difficulty until my uncle, at that time he was a Jesuit priest, with permission from Rome, came to look after our family by placing many of us into different foster family. I was raised by a Catholic foster family when I was 11 years old, 2 years after the death of my father. I guess during that time I was young and being away from my family, I could not handle the separation. In fact, I handled it very badly. I went into deep depression and become very withdrawal. I can remember that sometimes throughout the week, I will only say a few words. When people ask me questions, the family asks me questions, I say yes or no. I seldom engage into a conversation with anyone. This withdrawal become even worse as depression deepened. I remembered when I was about 12 or 13 years old, every morning when I woke up, I would feel so afraid because I know that there's a whole day ahead of me where I'm conscious of the depression and the pain. And at night, when I was going to bed, I would be so afraid to sleep because of the nightmare I was having. I remember very often at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning when everyone was asleep, I would slowly get up from my bed, go to the toilet, lock myself in the toilet and cry to my father. I have a small passport size picture of my dad, whom I always cry to. During the whole month of my depression, it gotten so worse that I also even thought of committing suicide. Thought of many different ways I can die painlessly. In those times of desperation of 3 years of depression from age 11 to close to 14 years old, I went through a desperate need for friends, but at the same time, I was so frightened and so reserved, I have no friends. So I started making imaginary friends. I came to know about Jesus when I was about 7 years old. In my hometown, there was a pastor who goes around gathering children for the catechism classes. My father was an ex-Baptist. He no longer practiced baptism, Christianity faith. But he did not stop us from going to the catechism. And in one of those catechism classes, I was 7, I was told of the story about Jesus loving children, how Jesus placed the children sitting on his lap and blessed them. This image stayed with me during the time of my depression. And because of that depression and the desperate need for friends, I turned to Jesus, my imaginary friend, for help. I poured out my feelings to him. I poured out my questions about life, about suffering, why about the death of my father, why it has to happen to us in our family, why our family is so unfortunate. All this, what is the meaning of our life? All these existential questions. Deep down inside, I did not really believe whether he is real or existed, but it was my desperate need clinging on to some form of hope that there is somebody out there who can hear and is hearing my cry and my pain. This went on until I was 14 years old. Until one day, I was coming back from school. It was in the afternoon. There was a lot of questions that was still stirring in my mind and in my heart. There was a dark cloud hanging over my head. But on that particular day, coming back from school, I remember standing up. The public transportation was packed. I was standing up, hanging onto the rails. And then there was a background song was playing. I can't even remember what song the radio was playing. But I remember one or two words from that song struck me. And suddenly it's like a enlightenment experience. My mind started opening up. And I started realizing, understanding rather, more about who I am, what is happening to me, the presence of God, and how he loves me. It's almost like, what Ignatian terms, like a cardonier experience for me. I stood there stunned with tears running down my face for about 20 minutes. And I remember crying deep down in my heart because I realized I was not alone. When I came down from the bus, I realized that I was a totally changed person. The person who went up to the bus and the person that came down were a totally different person. I remember my hair standing up because I can feel the pulsations of God's presence in whole creation. As I was walking back home, I feel like shouting at the top of my lungs, God is real and he is alive and he loved me. I am not alone. That was the first time I experienced God in a very tangible and real way. And that experience changed me drastically. The way I see the world, the way I understand myself, the way I relate to people changed. It was the first time where I felt the dark cloud hanging over my head disappeared and the sunshine surrounded me. It allows me to smile again and to make friends. That was the time when I come to realize how great God's love was for me. This experience made me realize many things about my family background and how it was, in many ways, divine providence where I am here today as a Jesuit priest. First and foremost, I realized if our family was rich or not necessarily very rich, just above middle class, able to sustain ourselves with a business, I probably would not have experienced God. Because probably my uncle would not step in and put us into foster home. Even if my father had lived for another 10 years, I would not have become a Christian or have become a Jesuit in particular. Most importantly, if I have not been placed because of the death of my father and the interventions of my uncle, if I was not placed in the Catholic family and experienced the Christian way of life, I also would not have been called to become a Jesuit. The family backgrounds, the history surrounding it, the events that happen, the context for which I am called, so much depended on my family background, which is in many strange way broken and dysfunctional. But yet, within this broken and dysfunctional family, God calls me out of His mercy and love. To end this, I'd like to thank Father Ignatius, being one of his child, to be given this experience of the journey in the Society of Jesus. The pain and the brokenness I had growing up in a broken family, and the opportunity for healing and growth and self-understanding provided to me by the Society of Jesus was all thanks to Father Ignatius for starting this journey and initiating this society, allowing so many sons of his experience what he had experienced, God in grace.
I think whenever I share about my vocation, I always think of my grandmother and my aunt, my two other mothers. Why? Because they were the ones who were encouraging me as a precocious little child that uh, that I would be good. It would be good to become a priest. And I was attracted to the priesthood earlier on in my life because uh, both my grandmother and my aunt would always bring me to church. Not just on Sundays, but even on devotional days like Wednesdays to the Redemptorist Church and Fridays, sometimes to the Santo Niño. My grandmother makes it a point to really bring me. Firstly, because at that age, I could no longer remember how old she was, when she was bringing me to church. But I was her second grandchild, and at that time, my grandmother was already uh, kind of a PWD already. She could not straighten up her uh, right arm, so she was a bit uh, limited in terms of movement. She cannot see very well, so I was kind of like a cane to my grandmother, and you know, I'm proud to be her cane because as a child, I would love to go outside and you know, explore the explore what is outside. Luckily, my grandparents or my grandmother would always bring me to church, and she was very patient with me because I tend to ask many questions like uh, what are the names of these saints, who is this, who is that, and why is the priest wearing a very long robe, all those things. And my Lola was very patient in answering my questions. And I have always been fascinated by the the priests the priests that I have seen and met. They were also kind to my lola and my aunt also, no? My aunt, if I remember it, I have two aunts who are very active in the church, and they have this, they were members of Legion of Mary, and I was open earlier on in my life about, religious activities, about God, and especially if my aunt and my lola would tell me stories from the Bible. Those were very entertaining moments for me. Fascinated with God, how He intervened, how He um, interacted with human beings like us. Of course, the I mean, I have no, I was not very conscious of how powerful God was. I was just fascinated by the way He treated people, how He loved, and how He was very kind to them. So basically, that's it. And of course, the prayers. Oh, by the way, the prayers is one that is also fascinating because uh, my Lola was teaching me how to pray as early as 4 years old. So that was like 1964 already, and it was still pre-Vatican II. So the prayers were either in Latin or in Spanish. I could not understand what they were, but I tend to just repeat what my Lola and my aunties would do in prayer. And also in the rosaries, I would repeat after them. It was like a social thing for me. Grandmother and my aunt. No, my mother was working. My father was also working. So most of the time, I was left to the care of my grandmother and my aunt. Especially also that I have a younger brother who was born premature, and so when I was born, there were two of us infants. And since my brother was premature, he was always sick. He, my mother and my father will always bring him to the hospital. So me as an infant also, I was left to the care of my grandmother. And that's why I was so uh, affectionately attached to my grandmother and my aunt. No. Um, my mother also, no, she's not very religious, but she knows her obligation. My father was more religious than my mother. No, my father was also the first one who taught me the prayers, especially the prayers before I sleep. And he's always the one who would wake us up on Sunday mornings to wash up and wear something formal so that we can go to church early. Basically, my family was a religious family, but even more so with my Lola because she's a, if I remember right, she's a devotee of the Mother of Perpetual Help. She was a devotee of Santo Niño. She was also a devotee of San Roque, who was the patron saint of our barangay then. And every, in a way, she always leads the prayer also when there are, uh, you know, uh, novenas in different chapels around our area. So she really taught me how to pray, to the point that at 8 years old I was already leading the rosary prayer in our family. She was very proud, and she was always encouraging me to, you know, to pray and desire that I become a priest. She was looking forward that later on in life I would become a priest. And it was curious because even the discovery of that ad was strange because I never intended to open the newspaper really on the ad side because after all I had the job already. Why would I need to open the classified ads? That's it. I was able to discover that small piece of advertisement and I was attracted to it. So I attended the vocation seminar and basically that was it. No, that was it. That was the start of it all. But then it was still not. I remember that was 1984, and after my discovery of the vocation seminar, after I attended that thing, nothing really attracted me at first until the director then, Father Pablo Cavan, invited us again to meet at the center and brought us on exposure to the various depressed areas of Cebu. And that was an eye-opener for me. For the first time, I felt happy with what we were doing, just talking to people, the poor people in our areas, how they were. For the first time, it's as if my eyes were open to the realities of life. No, uh, poor as we are, but all my life I've always been thinking of my family. It was kind of the world I was into, forgetting that the world is such the world is big, and you know the realities were big and fascinating as well. And I felt that this was an opportunity for me to find meaning in serving people really. And for the first time during those exposures, I was not thinking of money. I was not thinking of uh, salaries, of benefits, of how to become rich. I was just happy being there. And looking back at it at hindsight, I think it was God's way of attracting me to be of service to people.
The story of conversion, of my own conversion, really started from my family, especially my mother, because realizing now my mother has been a very instrumental person, why or where, well, who I am right now, because her own conversion really was the, if you want to call it, the cannonball experience of my own conversion. Because my mother, in the very beginning, she was an ordinary woman, a very resourceful woman, very also a responsible woman, but she has her own share of little vices. She learned some little bit of gambling, little bit of drinking, very typical of uh, some women, wives in our place. No? But then the real conversion came to her life when when she joined the Corsilio movement. Those are the days when this Cursilio movement was really a Christian lay movement that really tried to train lay people for Christian leadership, Christian leadership. And that was for her, was the beginning of her own conversion. And she became a different woman after that. But that was also, just as I said, a beginning, because that was also, she became more open to whatever God wanted uh, her to do in her life, with her life. She became involved, especially in the area of charismatic movement that was in probably 1976, 1977, when she became involved with charismatic movement. And that was it. Started again, many things changed in her life. She became the person whom people would come to ask for advice, come for counseling, come for just talk, talk about, and also people wanted her to help them heal some people, do some charismatic prayer meetings, healing, deliverance, and all that. No, she was very involved in the church during those times, and in our house, it was always full of people there because they would want to go and see my mother and just to ask for her advice. And I didn't know. Now, that's what I'm doing right now. Counseling, spiritual direction, and I realized that it came from her in many ways. And I thank God for her for all those times. And she was not only that, she was not only doing those things, she was also going from one place to another, going to different places in Mindanao, attending charismatic prayer meetings, giving lectures, and all that. And I realized that the person who's always been adventurous even before, she was always adventurous, but that was also the beginning of actually the seed of a missionary spirit there. I didn't realize this until I entered the Jesuits. She was also an inspiration to me because she was always out there serving other people. And for me, she's always been part of my own conversion story. And one time after I professed my vows, 2 years after, I went home and I asked him, why is it, Mom, that after many years, suddenly we're six in the family now, six, one sister and five brothers. Two used to be eight, but two died already. But among the six, there are three priests and one sister, a religious sister, our eldest only sister. And I asked her, why is it? What happened? Why is it that we became one by one? We entered the religious life, and she just smiled and she told me about the story that during those times when she was in the charismatic movement, she always would want to find a time to pray. And after lunchtime, after serving us, serving the family, washing the dishes, she would go to our parish church and prayed there. And she just started praying for some form of reparation for her own sins in the past. And she started praying that at least one can join the offering one of us to join the religious life. And suddenly I realized that I wanted to tease her and said, maybe your praying was bringing, it was very intense, so much so that we are now four in the family who are in the religious life. And she just smiled at us and smiled at me then. And yeah, that was her. She's always a person who prays very hard. And I remember when I was sent to Cambodia for missionary work to replace Brother Richie Fernando there. I remember that she also prayed for me, and she told me I was praying for you. And I could feel, I could sense her prayers very effective, because not just I survived there, but my own conversion to the Society of Jesus, to the mission of the society, also was born because my mother is very instrumental in our own vocation stories. My I have a twin brother who is also a religious priest, was a diocesan priest rather. And now I just learned from the diocese that his new assignment now is to be a formator of diocesan priest in St. John Theological Seminary in Cagayan de Oro. And I realized that our lives really are, my life and my siblings' lives are really towards some form of formation work, because my sister was always been in formation work when she was entered the religious life. Now she gives 30-day retreats, she gives counseling, she gives many other things in the congregation. My brother also was once a formator. And now my twin brother is now also a formator in the theological seminary, where I also worked for 5 years. So this, I'm just amazed how God really worked wonders through simple, ordinary persons like my mother. And this is also, I believe, what St Ignatius also experienced through his own family. Very ordinary, but very influential also in his own life, in his life of conversion. I'm very thankful to God for continuing this accompaniment in my life as a person trying to love and trying to serve God in the Society of Jesus. And Ignatius plays a very big role now, as I also, in my work as a novice master, the young Jesuits. Now this is my 9th year as a novice master, and it's been a fruitful journey, full of enthusiasm, full of love and service, full of the experience of the Spirit in my life and in the life of people. And conversion does not end here. It's always a continuing journey, always continuing from the self-centeredness towards the life of God, the life of the Spirit, the life of Christ. Emptying ourselves so that God may become more and more fully in us, with us, and through us becomes alive also in others, for the sake of others and for the sake of God. for God's greater glory.